Dear bird, why haven't you made this lake your home? This is the most beautiful scene I have seen in all of my travels. The air is clear, there are no smells. This could become your perfect home, sanctuary. I would write letters to you every day and read them as you danced on the ground or chased the sky. Oh, bird, why haven't you made this lake your home? You and your chicks would fly high with not a disturbance for miles. A peaceful sight, a wonderful silence, only echoing chirps bouncing from mountainside to mountainside, clear waters to wash and clean waters to drink. Bird, come to this place so that we may live. Please, let me see you this one last time.
Hello, everyone. My name is Sarah Edmonds. I'm the editor-in-chief of For Page and Screen magazine. I'm here today for our second season of our summer interview series with Mirm Hurula. They are the author of Just One More Bird, Old House, Old Screams. Both stories we had the honor of publishing in our fifth issue. I'm super excited to have you here today. Thank you so much for joining us.
I'm super excited for this interview. This is my first interview, so
Oh, extra
yes.
excited. I love that. I love that. Yeah, just to get us started, I feel I'll let you pick, but the first question is just what inspired the stories. I'll let you pick which one you want to talk about first, because I feel like they're two very different vibes. So we can go one way and then the other.
Yeah, I would say the inspiration for Old Houses, Old Screams, I was working I have been in education for forever. And it was a state testing day and it was October and I was like, I haven't written scary stuff before. I haven't tried to write horror or anything like that. So honestly, I was sitting like panning up every like 2 minutes to make sure they're not cheating, and to make sure they're actually doing their work. Um, and I was writing horror for that whole month, and Old Houses, Old Screams was one of the stories that came from that sort of batch of like 40 to 60 poems and stories. Just One More Bird, on the other hand, I feel like encapsulates a lot of my journey. Um, Kind of having to leave old things behind and reminiscing about those old times. I have been in heavy grief for a very, very long time, as we'll probably talk about a little bit later, because that inspires a lot of my writing currently. Um, but it just kind of like, I want to venture out, but I want to try to still have those connections with what I've left behind. So, yeah.
I love that. I love that. I definitely do want to talk about that a little later, but I'm curious about um first of all, 40 plus horror stories and poems. That is impressive. That is
Thank you.
impressive. How do you go about like having, this is going to sound weird, having such a high output for your writing?
Oh, I think I follow the words of someone who I look up very much. Her name is Teresa Singatono. She's a Samoan author and poet. And she talked once about writing and how, like, sometimes it's just like putting your head down and just like doing it, because like inspiration is not always going to be there, and like you're not going to write well every single time. And I know that, like, I have a running document currently of all of my poems that I've ever written that I have on file somewhere, whether it's in a notebook or it's on my laptop or on my computer. And between those two and my prose document that kind of doesn't fit in either one, I think I have over 400, like, just kind of like, and some of them are published on my Instagram, some of them are published across the literary scape, and those kinds of things. And so, like, I don't know, I just write when I can. I write when I'm feeling bad. I write when I'm feeling happy. I'm writing when I'm feeling inspired. And I'm writing when I can't think of a single word to write down. And I'm just like listening to either music or a TV show, and whatever they say is kind of like the first words that I can put on the page and then spin it to whatever I'm doing, or absolutely just copy whatever they're saying on the TV. So yeah.
Yeah, I love that as kind of advice, daily practice, that kind of thing. I love that. It reminds me of the first time I moved out of my parents' house and
Mm.
I knew no one. I so apologize. My dad just started mowing the lawn. I live here again. Fun fact. But if you can hear it, I apologize. Um, but the first time I moved out of my parents' house, I was in this town where I didn't really know anyone. I
Mhm.
like knew the town and knew my coworkers that I moved down there for, but I was not in a good place mentally. So I just like forced
Yeah.
myself to write a poem a day for like, the entire time I was there. They were
Yeah.
all terrible, but I'm not a poet. They were all awful, but it was really good practice and like really good writing experience as well as also just
Yeah.
kept me sane.
Yeah, I feel like writing is such like a hard discipline that isn't necessarily talked about a lot.
Mhm.
Like to write as much as an author or a poet does, like you do have to kind of like I'm fortunate enough that right now I have a very unsteady part-time job. So I can have like days where my 9 to 5 is writing from 9 to 5.
Mhm.
Or like if I am coaching, because that's a job that I have currently, that I'm writing from whenever I wake up to when I have to go and coach at like 3 o'clock.
Mhm.
So yeah.
Yeah, that definitely can make it easier having that like those time blocks and chunks
Yes, for
to write.
sure.
That's awesome. Now, you had mentioned that one of the reasons Old House Old Screams came about is because you wanted to try out the horror genre. Do you find that you experiment across genres often, or do you have one that's kind of one you love and you try out other ones? Okay.
Yeah, I have one that I love. I love sci-fi fantasy. That is like my like place of warmth and coziness and remembrance of both my parents being such huge sci-fi and fantasy fans. I grew up with them watching Battlestar Galactica, Doctor Who, and all of Star Trek. And so I have this kind of background in like loving all of that. And so my writing gravitates towards that. And so like I always want to push myself to be a better writer. And so like branching out into horror, I I'm writing romance right now, and it's like the weirdest thing ever, and I don't know what to do. But thankfully it's written in verse, so it's like easier for me because I feel like poetry is such like a big scape that I love to traverse all the time and all day, every day. But yeah, I love just trying out new genres and trying out new things. The only thing I am like I would say that I tend to stay away from is like upmarket and like literary things, because it's like I want I don't necessarily think that my writing lends itself to having like undertones and overarching like story arcs to kind of like drive my stories. Mine is more like characters driven by situations that are put in place, and the stakes that I give them. So yeah.
Yeah, no, that definitely makes sense. Um, I find that one thing that's interesting because I don't consider myself a literary writer either.
Mhm. Yeah.
Adore all genre, but
Yeah.
and all commercial fiction. But one thing I find that's interesting is that oftentimes when we think of like the heavy symbolism, like the overarching themes, the things that we
Mhm.
think of when we think of literary, um, a lot of writers put them in subconsciously, or even
Mhm.
if they're not like subconsciously put in, readers will find them inspired
Yeah.
by that. And that's one thing I love because I could definitely, just from like these two stories, I could definitely feel like kind of a literary tilt or nod to the literary
Yeah.
in the way that they're written. So I wouldn't untick that box quite yet.
Quite yet, quite yet, quite yet. I'll keep trying. Keep trying.
Yeah. But yeah, you've mentioned poetry a couple of times. I'm curious, do you hmm, wording. Um, did you find that prefer do you wow, I cannot English. I'm sorry.
You're totally okay.
Do you find that you prefer poetry over prose, or did you start with poetry before prose? Those are two separate questions. They were getting jumbled.
It's all right. It's all right. So I started with prose as an elementary schooler. So embarrassing. But I started out writing novels as like a third grader. And obviously it's a sci-fi sort of like fantasy-esque superhero thing where myself and my classmates were in the story. I had just transferred into a new school, trying to make friends, trying to like figure myself out. I didn't do any of those things, but what came about was something called the Elemental Quartet, which was kind of what it sounds like: earth, wind, fire, water, with myself and my fellow friends. My cat has decided to join us, so he's also in this now. Um, and then after a while, I was very discouraged by writing because like I wasn't making friends and like I thought that my writing sucked. Something I tell a lot of people, especially like young writers, is that like I grew up unable to comprehend. I wasn't taught properly ever. I wasn't taught like a sort of one-to-one sort of thing. So my English greatly declined. Like I was considered like not smart in that sort of sense. And so I was like, then I'm not a good writer. And so from fourth grade until my second year in college, I didn't write. And then I was part of a performance group, which did like spoken word poetry and performances like that, which I did some directing with that, which was super fun. And I was introduced to poetry, and that was kind of my drive throughout all of college, which was then another 3 years. And then from there, I graduated with not even an education degree, but that's a different story for another time. And I got home. My father was very quickly, I think within a month, my father was diagnosed with cancer. And he inspired my first prose book. And that manuscript currently stands at 120,000 words, all inspired just by my father. And then I've just been writing ever since. Like, I dabble in both. I love writing short stories. I love just like putting like new characters in the sense that I don't see them in any sort of mainstream into stakes that I've seen already like there. As like a Pacific Islander writer, like a lot of my short stories that are like longer, I would say like upwards of like 7,000 words, all are about Pacific Islanders, whether it's like a sci-fi about like a disease, like making everybody turn into stone and then relying on a grandmother and her like knowledge of um plants like to heal everybody, or it's about the retelling of the ugly duckling but making the main character a trans child, and kind of like having that and then finding out that their parent is also trans and the reason why the child was given to another because they were still like trying to figure themselves out. um and so like I want these sorts of like stories, and even like I feel like the ugly duckling story I just described, has not been done before, but still, like I feel like it's kind of like perfect. And with my poetry as well, it's just based on my experiences. In the last year and a half, I've been doing a lot of grieving. I've lost both of my parents, and so there's a lot of sadness and a lot of good outlets for me, that aren't harmful to me, that I can find in poetry, and just being like, I'm sad and here's all the reasons why, and this is what I'm feeling like right now. And like, it's just like the best way for me to express myself.
I'm so sorry for your loss. I'm sorry to hear that.
Thank you.
Yeah. Now, working through emotions and grief in writing, have you found, is that, rephrase this, is that writing that you're sharing, trying to share right now, or is it more personal that you're kind of keeping for yourself?
I give myself about like a 6 months grace period to have that poem for myself, and to allow myself to grieve with it for however long. And like most of the time, it's like 6 months. Um, and like every single like submission that I've been like putting out, which is like 12 a week or something like that, um, have those like just like intertwined with the rest of them, because it's just like this has been my life for what seems like a million years, but I know it's been like 20 calendar months, because I've been so sad. And winter has come and gone twice, and that makes me even big sadder. So yeah, it's just, I love the imagery that my grief poetry has given to myself, and the ones that have been published recently, hopefully I've given to others as well.
I love that. And I feel like your ability and vulnerability to share that as well is something that's really powerful. People connect and relate to grief. And I'm sure, I'm positive that there are people who are connecting with that and resonating with that. So
Mm-hmm.
I'm sure they all appreciate that you're sharing it as well. And you'll have to send me some personally, just to like be like, here's where it's published. I want to read it.
For sure, for sure.
Yeah. Um, absolutely. Now, okay. So this is kind of a question that kind of like blends the emotional aspect with this technical form approach. I'm curious what your process is when you're writing kind of those grieving poems, because I imagine, and I know from my own work, when I do really, really personal things, I usually kind of just like word vomit on the page, and then going back to edit can be kind of a surreal experience because you have to look at it from an objective eye. But that's just my experience. I'm curious what your experience is with that.
I have a very similar initial experience as you. I do word vomit. I think it's a pointed word vomit, so it's more projectile. Because I think about it for like a little bit longer. Like I allow the words to kind of marinate in my brain, while tears are obviously like coming out of my eyes and like snot dripping from my nose. Um, and so from there, I usually have a phone with me because I'm not at my computer or laptop sobbing. I'm usually in bed, like about to fall asleep, and then my mind just like wanders in not great places. But from there, I usually let it sit on my phone for like a few weeks for that objective eye, so that I can just kind of go back and be like, okay, everything is misspelled. What was I trying to say here? Why is the word something here? Was I trying to put something that isn't this word? Is it supposed to be something else? Like, um, so, and then honestly, I don't edit it that much, if I'm being completely honest. Like, I feel like my own raw emotions are so much more, I don't want to say important, but honestly, for myself, like it's super important for me to just be like, yeah, this is my raw and authentic like feeling about it. I think I lost my mother first, and her fiance makes me really upset. And so like there's a few poems that I've written about like our relationship and like the falling out that I had with him, which is again another story for another day. Because it's a lot. Um but I like look back and I'm like, do I really want to like try and publish this? And then I think about it for a second and I'm like, yeah, I do need to publish it as is. Like the line, all you did was fuck her and I was her like child. Like I love those two lines together. And I love that I wrote them in a Taco John's drive-through because I remember when I wrote that poem and I was waiting for my food at that time. Um but word vomit is great. I love word vomiting and then kind of just letting it be. Obviously indentations and like spaces and creating an atmosphere is like super important. And I think my poems, my like very vulnerable poems, like really like lend into that. And that would be the only editing I would do.
I was just curious with like indentations and line breaks, if
Oh,
you put those in kind of intuitively or if there's a process, like a formal. Sorry, I just put my phone on airplane mode. It's still digging. Um, if there's kind of a formal process that you go through for that.
everything is intuitive for me. I feel like if it looks fine, it's great. Like, do I want to pause here? And it's like I pause naturally. If there's like if I have a line break on my phone and I put it on my computer, it's like I could just tab and then have that space and still have that as part of that same thought. I'd say as of late, I for the novel I'm currently working on, I did so much research into novels in verse and just the impact that line breaks have and that indentations have and that tabs have just in the middle of a thought and like how just like that space can hold so much. And I was like, oh, now I have to do that. And so like I'd say now in the like 300 poems that I have like just in my, just in my belt, my utility belt, um they just were intuitive and now I think I'm making them more intentional. Whether it's like a repetition or um like I really just want to make this like its own thing. And I really just like if it's like a single line, like those breaks are so important to me. Like I want this to be a standalone thing. I just want this to be like its own because it is like that's just what it is. So um yeah, what I'm putting out right now for submissions across everywhere, intuitive. Everything in the future, very intentional.
Nice. And do you think that your background with like spoken word influences that at all?
Yes, for sure. Um, I don't often have time to read things out loud, especially with my grieving poems, because I don't want to have to like sob my eyes out multiple times a day because I would not get anything done. But the voice in my head definitely still has that voice that I brought to those stages and to the competitions that I participated in. Um, and yeah, even now, um, I write and yeah, that little 19-year-old is like, oh, ha, ha, this is fun. And now I'm like, ha, I'm 26 and this is super fun. And I love writing poetry and short stories.
Enjoying it is the best part,
Yes,
honestly,
for sure.
completely. Um, yeah, so I'd love to talk about your kind of process going through submissions. I know some people are very, very kind of procedural researching journals, which one's the best fit, and other people being me, like you're open. If it's the word count, okay, bye. That's it. Um, So I'm curious what your process is for that.
Yeah, so I have as I said, I have a giant Google Doc with all of my prose, poetry, and short story prose. Um, and I have all the titles if they're being submitted, notes that I need to know whether it's a work in progress or it's a part of a different project that I'm currently trying to submit somewhere else. Um, and if it's been published yet. So I'm not like, has this been published? Has this been on my Instagram? Because some places are like, no Instagram, and other places are like, Instagram? Okay. So, from I don't start necessarily there, but that's always the like document that's open. I use a website called Chill Subs, and the free services there are honestly great and like immaculate. And the fact that I can get all that information and download it for myself, also amazing and great. Um, so I go on there. I have, as of late, been looking for more places that pay because I feel like those places have a bigger readership, have a wider like scape. And like as I'm querying to agents currently for 3 projects, I want to be like in my query letter saying I'm being published at these places and hopefully you know these places. Obviously like the New Yorker and like those like huge places are intimidating, but I'm hoping that next month I'm going to start like really hitting those like bigger places that agents have been telling me that like if you're published there, like I'm definitely like looking at your manuscript because they're real with me and I love it. Um but I look for like if I'm looking at like my short story list, which my short story list is very small currently because they're being submitted everywhere. Um and then, so right now I'm looking at poetry. Everything is in alphabetical order, which I don't necessarily like because I've been submitting to a lot of places that start with the letter A and B, which I need to change. Um, and then I kind of look at their from there there's a page that kind of like gives like an overview of like who they are. I go to their website, kind of give like a quick read through. I'm not doing like the in-depth research about them, but like if I read some of like their past issues, or my cat is being very loud. I don't know if you can hear him, hopefully not. um but just doing that minimal research for myself to like to come to terms with like if I'm accepted here, like I'm gonna be okay with it. Like my most recent acceptance was from Children, Churches, and Daddies, which is about um, the strain between like people who leave the church and the church, which is right up my alley as I have done that and have left and have some poems about it. Um, so from there, I kind of just like go through my list. I have like snippets in my head of like the ones that I remember. And then I have to do like the thing of going through every notebook if it's not been published in its own doc. Um, and just kind of like reading through it to see if it's something that I want to publish. Like it's not that like I'm looking at word count and then it's like an immediate publish for me. It's that does this fit the theme? Because I've noticed that um in the last year I've been published about 5 or 6 times, and it's because I followed those themes, which has been like a huge step. And then in my brain I thought I was going to be like this tiny little step. So and then yeah, I just send it off and then honestly I kind of forget about it, which has been nice. And then whenever I get an email, I like look at the email and I'm like, all right, here's another rejection, which 90% of the time, yes, it's another rejection. But then those 10% of times, I'm like, wow, I did it. I'm a writer.
Yeah, I feel like after a while, the rejections are just kind of default. Like I always just
Yeah.
get the email and assume, and then it's like, oh, no,
Yeah.
actually nice. Like, cool.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. I was just talking to someone recently who was just starting querying, and she's really nervous about it. And I'm like, I totally get it. At this point in like my personal like query journey for like agent querying, I'm just like, it is what it is. Like
Yeah.
I'm so
Yeah.
inundated to it. Which I should probably not be saying on podcast. It's going to broadcast, but whatever.
You're at that point in your journey. This is where you are. You'll
Fine.
probably leave at some point.
Yeah, hopefully. Yeah.
Yeah.
Um, but yeah, anyway, no, that makes a lot of sense. I'm curious. This is actually somewhat selfish question
Go
from the
ahead.
magazine side. Um, when you look for magazines and you find they have specific like themed calls, are you like you mentioned looking through notebooks and finding stories that potentially fit? If it was magazine you really liked and you didn't have something that would fit, would you write something for it?
Yes, 100%. And that's that like my mindset of like I want to try new things. Like my I think I don't know if I sent you that author bio, but my author bio is always like I want to try new things. Like I am an author and a poet, but like I just want to try everything. Like I truly like except for like essays, that's like the one thing I don't want to go back to college, but like there's like a project I might start working on that it's going to require me to do essays and I'm just going to have to like bite a wooden spoon and act like I'm giving birth to a child. um, but yeah, yeah.
Okay, that's interesting. That's interesting. I'm totally selfishly asking because our theme calls are usually we get many like much fewer submissions for those, like to the
Mm.
point where we're like, do we want to keep doing them? Rather
Yeah.
than open submissions. So I like to ask authors that every once in a while just to get the other perspective
Mhm.
from the other side of the table. So thank you for
Yeah.
selfishly.
I would also say I haven't been diagnosed, but like I have like brain fog a lot. And so like I'll be like, yeah, I definitely like want to write this. I write it down. I write like the due date for like the themed call. And I say like 3 out of 5 times, I totally forget about it. And it's like I would have, but then my brain was like, nah, dude. And we're like, all right, dude. So
I get that. I get that. I do that with when magazines or journals or agents are like, oh, we're opening to submissions or opening to queries this day. I'm like, okay, cool. I screenshot it and then
mhm.
it disappears into the ether. Never
Yeah.
again.
I was just cleaning. I did like huge clean. It's spring, so obviously spring cleaning. And I recently found a physical calendar on my kitchen table. And I was like, this has worked out really well in the past. And like it's May and it's a 24, it's not a 20, it's an 18-month like calendar. So like I'm like flipping and flipping and flipping. And honestly, we're so close to June that like honestly, like we're already like more than halfway done with this. And it's man. But yeah, I'm gonna see if that's gonna work for me. That like every time I go in my kitchen, I'm like, oh yeah, that really cute picture, and I have something coming up. So we'll see if that works.
Hopefully, I will keep my fingers crossed for you.
Thank
And
you.
if it works, I might have to copy.
Yes, I will update you.
Yeah, please do. Definitely. Now, I'm curious. You mentioned kind of the focus or the inspiration for the first book that you were working on. You've mentioned three, so I'm curious if you're willing to tell us a little bit about them. I know you're querying, so if you want to keep stuff under wraps, like that's also
Yeah. First one that I wrote, which is the behemoth of 120,000 words, follows the kind of aftermath a few years after um of a young woman who has no name because it was taken from her from the people who previously owned her as capitalism kind of bleeds into the apocalypse. It just is going to happen because that's the world that we live in. And it follows her. Oh my gosh, I don't want to give anything away. This is so difficult.
that's okay. You don't have to.
Yeah. But it follows her journey into finding the one thing that will protect her from them as it's like considered a sanctuary among all of the people who own um, And then there's like, it's not, that's like usually what happens. The second one that I finished was a children's book. Again, I'm cross genres, like I try everything. But this one is about dealing with big emotions. I kind of want to make it like I want to make it multiple books. It's also set in like like medieval times. Like I really want to make that kind of like the setting backdrop sort of thing. Because that's just who I am. I love sci-fi fantasy. It's great. And so like the like the one sentence that I keep telling agents about this and they reject me is like, what if gentleness was a warrior's greatest asset? And so that like putting that into a children's book. Yeah. And then the one that I'm currently working on, I'm in a publishing program currently, and this is the one that I'm working on. It's a novel in verse and it's a queer romance YA a novel in verse that follows football players falling in love. So it is very in left field. I feel like the three that I've just given you is like honestly like the like far ends of the spectrum of what the literary scape is. So yeah.
I love that. I love that. No. Gosh, I feel like I'm resonating with everything you're saying about like the way that you go about writing and like the
Yeah.
genre spread and all of that. Um, yeah, I understand. I understand. I'm also a try everything type of person.
Yeah.
So, and I think it's good. I think it's good to drive. I mean, I'm biased, of course, but I think that when you're willing to experiment with your genre and go outside of your comfort zone, then you can like bring those other perspectives into like the cozy home space of the main
Mm-hmm.
genre and like get that perspective and experience and all that. So I think it's a great thing.
Yeah. I would say my my like reasoning and like background of that is very different from every writer. I'm a powerlifting and weightlifting coach. And so like growth mindset and trying new things is completely based off of my background in powerlifting and weightlifting. And so it's like yeah, like I want to try something new because like I have a tiny little muscle that's like super like small and like weak in my back, or like I just want to be like a little bit faster, even though I reached my peak for how fast I can be, but it doesn't matter. But that like that growth mindset and that like just like can do attitude and that like the willingness to fail is definitely rooted in that. Like, I was a powerlifter in high school. I was a state champion in high school, and like failure is just part of it, like, and I became very well acquainted with failure at that time and that like such a pivotal like moment in my life. I was very depressed at that time. So like failure was also kind of like, driving my depression. But like as a 26-year-old, like now I can view failure as like, yeah, like I'm going to step in the river one time and then I'm going to find a stone the next, or I'm going to step in the river a lot. And I like water. So it's like, all right, like let's go for a swim really fast and like take a break, like, wow, my metaphors, they've never been more on point than right now.
I love it. It's perfect. Awesome. So I just want to check in. Are there any topics that you want to talk about that I haven't talked about?
I feel like I've hit everything. I mean, I think the biggest thing for me that I would love to talk about is that like I don't mean this in I feel like I don't mean this in the way that I was grown up to like, and have been taught. But like any person it can be a writer, like I am literally a high school powerlifting coach and I do weightlifting like off to the side. And like that is like a huge passion of mine. And then on top of all of that, like I'm querying agents to become like a published author with a book. And like I have all of these things that like make me such a well-rounded person that like being an author is just a part of it. And like, yeah, being an author can be your whole personality, and that's totally cool. Like, you do you, but like, that's just not who I am. And I feel like so many people are like, I can't be an author. Like, I can't. Like, that's just like not in my like realm of like, I can't, that's not something tangibly that I can see myself doing in the future. And like, neither can I, honestly. Like, my dream is to like not have a job and just write for the rest of my life. Like, I just want to put out books and put out poetry and like just put things out into the world that have never been put out into the world. And like, cool, that could be like, I could get back into powerlifting and then be that for the powerlifting like world. I could be that for the education scape and like be an educator like that. And like, that facet of me is not more or less important than me being a writer. Like, I am putting my stuff out into the world as a writer because this is my passion. This is like what I want to do. It's okay to fail. It's okay to like not get it. Like, I've spent the last 4 months getting rejections for poetry. And in the week that I was at a conference and pitching to agents like one to one, I received my first acceptance in 4 months. Like, there's going to be those like dips and there's going to be those like high highs, and they're going to like, hey, you got to ride those high highs and hopefully you can glide and not plummet. So I feel so often we just like plummet instead of glide. But it's just like, I want I want to see more people who are not an Ernest Hemingway or a Margaret Mead or just like those old white authors. Like, I want to see more Octavia Butlers, more N.K. Jemisons. I want to see like more out there. And I feel like so many people are like, no one wants to read it. And I can guarantee you there's at least one person who wants to read it, because out of 7 billion people, 8 billion people in this world, they're going to find your book and you're going to like inspire that one person to do whatever it is that you inspire them to do.
Absolutely. I fully believe that there's an audience for every story. There's an audience for every book. So absolutely, absolutely. And I feel like I know the answer to this question, but I'm going to ask it anyway. Do you think that your broader experience with powerlifting, with education, has kind of helped shape the way you write?
Mm.
Maybe I don't know the answer to
I would say it's shaped my discipline of the writing. It's shaped my ability to be able to write for hours on end and to be able to go back for and like edit work for hours again. Um, but I feel like, and this has only happened very recently, of like my love for reading to come back and for that to inspire me more to be like, yeah, right. Like, this book is dog shit and you can write better than this. And it's also a like self-confidence issue, which in my education and in my powerlifting career has not been good. But I feel like with my writing and the fact that I'm being published and the fact that like I was querying people and they liked my work, like those have boosted my confidence to a point where like it's bleeding into other parts of what my confidence is, whether it's about myself, about my body, about like me just like walking down the street and like someone recognizing me because I'm a coach and they're like, coach. And I'm like, what the heck? I feel like this is what it feels like to get catcalled. Please don't. But then I see a young child waving in the window of their gray car and I'm like, oh, hi, it's so nice to see you. And like I feel like I've been such a better coach because of my writing. And I can like just be a better person, especially for all of the young women that I work with. And starting to really work with my young men because I need to work with them more, but I don't know how.
Fair, fair. But yeah, no, that's great. And I love the advice. There's kind of like advice nestled into your story of kind of don't deny yourself the opportunity to pursue things if you want to, just because of the way society sees a writer and all
Mhm.
of that. I think that's
Yeah.
really mhm. um yeah, so to hop to my last two questions for you. Do you have anything out right now that you would like to promote or things that are going to be coming out soon that you want to kind of get our listeners to go find once they're there?
Yeah. I wish I had something coming out. I really do. I would say, oh man, I'm still in that querying stage. I'm still in that rejection stage. And so I'm just gonna promote like my two stories that were published with you all because the fact that I got two published with you all, I was kind of like on the moon about it. And I was like, wow, like I don't have to worry about like trying to get those two published ever again, you know? And now I got to work towards like creating the two more to put on my list of my roster to like submit everywhere. Um, but yeah, go read Old Houses, Old Screams for a nice little horror, little tiny little thing because it's so short. And then take a walk with my main character through the mountains and find where the birds go. In just one more bird.
I love that. I love that. I was really excited we were able to publish those two stories. I love both of them personally.
Thank you.
Yeah, yeah. I'm a huge horror nerd. Like most of my prose writing is fantasy, sci-fi, but like I love horror. So like the other one, I was like, I love this. And then
Mm-hmm.
they both, I love just both. I'm gonna stop gushing, but I love them.
Thank you.
Couldn't
Thank you.
decide. So yeah, and that was really great because that was the issue. Your issue was the one we had our first guest editor, and she really loved both of them too. And then she had the idea about like the little letter at the front of the one, and I don't know. It was an interesting new experience from like an editorial standpoint working with a guest editor because like
Yeah.
we most of our editorial team knew her personally like before the magazine, so it wasn't there was no awkwardness, but it was just
Mhm.
like a cool new experience. So that was fun. I'm
Yeah.
glad it all worked out. This is just me rambling now. Yeah, so the ultimate question that I ask everyone is that if you had one piece of advice for other writers out there, poetry, prose, whatever, what would it be?
Get your workout to as many places as you can. Um, it's not about the rejections, but it's about the fact that they're reading it. It's about the fact that they are going to see aspects of your writing that they like, so that if you go back and give them something new, that you'll get that acceptance later. So often we live in the moment, and I am very, very guilty of it. But everything you're doing right now is going to affect your future. And so think more about how much these rejections are only going to help you in the future. That's honestly how I also get through my mountains of rejections. So, yes, that's mine too.
Great. That's great advice. I love that. Well, thank you so, so much for being here, speaking with me today. It was really great getting to talk,
Yes.
getting to know you.
Yes. Thank you so much for having me.